Alright, so this video is on parallelogram properties. There are four parallelogram properties that we need to know. Okay. The first two are pretty obvious. Okay, it's that opposite angles and opposite sides are congruent. So let's talk about the sides real quick. So for example, if I gave you that this top side was 14, then you automatically know that the bottom side is going to be 14. If I gave you that the left side is going to be 8, right, then you automatically know that the right side has to be 8. Opposite sides of the parallelogram have to be congruent. Now that property is very similar with the angles. Okay, opposite angles of a parallelogram have to be congruent. Now for the angles, I'm going to show you a problem with a variable. Okay, just to show you the different types of problems that you'll be facing. So in this case, I need to solve for x, right? Notice that 3x plus 5 and 44 degrees, they're opposite angles. And opposite angles of a parallelogram are congruent. Whenever things are congruent, you want to set the two quantities equal to each other. Alright? You don't add them up to 180. Please do not make that mistake. So I know that the opposite angles are congruent, so 3x plus 5 has to equal 44. Alright, then I subtract 5 on both sides. Right, I get 3x is equal to 39. Divide 3 on both sides, I get x is equal to 13. There you go. Alright, so I got opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent, and opposite angles of a parallelogram have to be congruent. Alright, now this next property has to do with the consecutive angles. And you guys might remember this from trapezoids, but consecutive angles are supplementary. That means they add up to 180. Alright, I'm going to write this here just to remind you guys. Supplementary. They add up to 180. Let me zoom in on this. Bam. Alright, please don't forget that relationship. So consecutive angles are supplementary. Now what does that mean? That means to settle my equation, well, first of all, what are consecutive angles in a parallelogram? They're angles that are next to each other, right? These are opposite angles because they're across from each other. These are consecutive angles. Now to settle my equation, real simple, 115 plus x plus 30 is equal to 180. Combine my like terms, x plus 145 is equal to 180. Subtract 145 on both sides, I get that x is equal to 35 degrees. Okay? Alright, so far we talked about the opposite sides of a parallelogram being congruent, the opposite angles of a parallelogram being congruent, and the consecutive angles adding up to 180. Now, there's one more property for the parallelogram, and it has to do with the diagonals. Alright, the property says that the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other, meaning they cut each other in half. So, if AC is my diagonal, that means AE and EC have to be equal to each other because it's cut in half. The diagonal is cut in half. So if AE is 3C and if EC is 2C plus 8, because they are both halves of the same diagonal, I know that they have to be congruent. They're equal to each other. So then I just solve for C. Subtract 2C on both sides. Alright, I get C, 1C is equal to 8. And I'm done.